So actually the pressure is on to come up with some really intriguing banter to start with, so everybody stays with the conversation.
That's the worst. I think I should start not even announcing I'm hitting the record button. But I feel like I'm compelled to, even though I think Arizona, we're only a one-party record state, but I don't know. But we're dealing with an international guest here too. So yeah.
Ontario is the same.
Okay.
So you go ahead.
I can sneak because it's like, okay, I'm going to start recording and let's go back to the conversation we were just having, and then inevitably it's kind of
everyone's frozen up now.
You're like, well, now what do we say now? So, but again, Andrew, I'm gonna re-say what you just said. I'm like, we're still in January, and 2025 has not. I think last time we said something like it was a hold my beer moment and stepped on the gas pedal, and now I feel like we are just continuously accelerating.
Yep.
Like it feels just absolutely.
And of course, so the funny thing is, when we set this up, we were going to be talking about OpenAI's 01 Pro model, which was all the big thing, a few days ago, it seems. And then in the prep for this, you've got DeepSeek coming out. You've got the paper I circulated this morning, which we may or may not get to, which is about AI replication. Things are just going crazy.
It's just going bonkers. Yeah. But I would say, let me open it this way too, because we'll get through this a little bit here. And we'll take a quick pause, and then we can get back so we can formally introduce our special guest, Mark. But so I'm curious. So both of you have been playing with all kinds of different models. You both have access to the ChatGPT Pro. I'm the only one here who doesn't at the moment. So we're going to see if you can persuade me to spend a 10x on the monthly expense here to go from the regular paid account to the Pro.
The $200 a month account, yes.
And so, Andrew, okay, curious if you're at all tempted to pivot your career and become a web-based game developer. Is it time now to do this?
I'm still waiting for those requests and checks. I mean, if they start coming in, maybe. But yeah, okay. So the context of this, of course, is that I was testing these models by creating 3 simple sort of web-based games, and they are very, very simple, but they're also a lot of fun. And Mark, I was going to come to you with this because the thing that grabbed me more than anything was it made me feel like I was 16 again with sort of early coding. And I don't know whether you've had the same sort of experience.
Absolutely. And it's just the availability of the affordance of creating things that, when we were 16, we had a lot of free time.
Yep.
I could learn 65 up to assembly language and learn how to write a game for the Atari 2600. And, I don't have that luxury anymore, but I can create something with less knowledge.
Yes, yeah. And so I was finding I could just tell ChatGPT, I want you to do this. And I went away and did a bit of work, then came back and had done it. But the time thing is crazy because, you're right. I also found myself getting sucked in. Head came up sort of 5 hours later, realizing I'd missed 5 hours of sort of meetings and deadlines and everything.
It is. See, it just becomes a new obsession. You just jump into it, and it's like, you're getting binge hooked on some game.
This
is
the existential risk.
Yeah,
it is one of the existential risks.
Right. Yes.
One of the. Well, it is interesting too because I was having this thought, and while I was sort of thinking about this, I'm like, okay. So when we think of it this way, it's wonderful. And Andrew, what is your previous game development programming experience?
Well, so this is going to sort of put me in sort of place and time, but in the 80s when the BBC microcomputer came out in the UK, which was actually a world changer.
And is it the Acorn? Was it called?
Oh no, it was pre-Acorn.
Pre-Acorn, okay.
Yes, yeah. No, this was a computer that the BBC contracted with a company to build to help people learn how to work with computers and how to sort of do basic coding in BASIC. And so when that came out, I used to play around with creating these graphical user interfaces. They were incredibly bad. So you had a cursor which sort of moved at about sort of a couple of pixels every few seconds or so. It was incredibly clunky. But yeah, I really got into it.
Yeah, I just looked it up. The BBC Micro, released in 1981.
Yep. It was a game changer.
That was the year I was born. Just going to put that out there.
There's Commodore 64 for me on the other side of the Atlantic.
Right, yes, yeah. I think everybody sort of has these initial computers that they hold dear in their heart.
Yes.
Yeah.
But it was wild, though. But as I was thinking about this, being able to go from, whatever your level, we can even say a lot of people, if you don't have, from going from no code, right? No code experience to using something like ChatGPT to then get you, a sizable amount of the way there, if not to some, again, depending on the level of sophistication you're looking for, all the way there.
Yep.
In terms of you were able to create 3 games, publish them. They're available on the web. We'll link them.
And it took a week.
While
I was actually doing my day job as well.
Sure. Right. In your spare time, you did that. You know what I mean? You found the extra minutes to do this. But
apologies to everybody who I blew off that week.
For all of you still waiting on that email response, now you know where it went. It went into the black hole of game development. But the question it raised in my mind, though, too, is like, if you are a game developer, how does this feel to know that someone can kind of come on your coattails pretty quickly, starting from no experience or maybe, no knowledge of the field or the craft or anything, and suddenly they're right behind you. In some sense. And I'm really curious at how that's going to start to play out as we, we'll take a break here in a moment, but when we start getting into like what we can do with some of these systems, how is that going to change where, you used to, if you were running this race, if someone just wanted to get into it, you knew they had that long ramp to upskill and understand.
It's accelerated. Mark, are you actually seeing this? I mean, you're more in this field than I am.
Yeah, and we've already seen it with diffusion-based image generation.
Yes.
There's a whole cohort of commercial and graphic artists whose skill set is being challenged in a really serious way. And skill set in the sense of it, learning my craft is my moat. The time I invested in that, and now the affordances that were only available to me are now available to one who hasn't made that investment. That feels unfair.
I like your analogy of the moat. It's like now everyone has a siege engine and can just, it's like it's just kind of democratized.
Great title of an article. Yeah, professions under siege.
I like it. This is going somewhere. I like that. That's fantastic. Well, I think we've got a ton to unpack and cover, and it's up to Andrew and Mark here to hold me to keeping this in a reasonable amount of time. But we'll take a quick break, and we'll come back and we'll introduce our special guest. All right. And we're back. So just again, I'm Sean Leahy, and I'm joined by my co-host,
Andrew Maynard.
And that means this is Modem Futura, the podcast that explores the intersection of technology, society, and the possible, probable, and preferable futures, asking deep questions like, what will it mean to be human in the future? And from our cold open, you can tell we're talking about all things AI, and no one better to do that with than our special guest, Professor Mark Daley. And Mark, you'll have to correct me if I get any of this wrong, because I have a question I'm going to ask you.
Because you used AI to put it together.
I used an AI system to tell me what this was. No, I used the old-fashioned way. I Googled it and got it off of your university's bio page. So Mark is the Chief AI Officer at Western University. That's in London, Ontario, Canada, and a full professor in the Department of Computer Science with cross appointments in 5 other departments, including the Brain and Mind Institute, the Rotman Institute of Philosophy, and the Western Institute for Neuroscience. He is also a faculty affiliate in Toronto's Vector Institute for Artificial Intelligence. Mark, with all of that stuff, I don't know how you found the time to spend this hour with Andrew and I, but thank you. And yeah, maybe if you could, just tell us a little bit about what you're currently focusing on right now with and how you split your time across five appointments.
Fortunately, I don't have to go to a lot of department meetings these days. I'm living in the president's office, and most of my time is spent working on the AI file. So it's everything from how this changes teaching and learning to the revolution that's happening in research, and most importantly, through to broader issues of how this changes the notion of a modern research university, and really forcing those conversations at the board level amongst our leadership. And people are willing to have those conversations, but if they're not aggressively prompted, Humans are normality seeking, right?
Yep. Okay. So you're there to push them out of equilibrium.
Yes, that's right. Not my job to generate fear, but my job to generate attention to things that will matter very, very soon.
Yep. Yep. So within that context, I've actually got to dive straight in with talking about OpenAI's 01 Pro model. So part of the genesis of this conversation was you telling Sean and myself that you had invested in the $200 a month to access this Pro model coming from OpenAI. And this was the thing that blew me away, and this was the thing that actually persuaded me to invest in it. You telling me that you had everything set up to cancel the subscription after a month, and you didn't. Why?
Yeah. All right,
$200 a month.
I had a note in my calendar that, the day I subscribed, I have to subscribe because I have to stay on top of trends and developments.
Due diligence, right? Yep.
Due diligence, but I put it in my calendar. Don't forget to cancel ChatGPT Pro. And then the appointed day came, and I realized I got way more than $200 worth of value out of this. Mm-hmm. There are so many things I had accomplished with 01 Pro that I didn't feel lower models would be able to do. To do in a traditional way would have cost me way more than $200. So it was actually a very easy decision, but this is net beneficial.
Interesting. So, okay, so I'm the one third here of this panel that doesn't have access at present to the Pro model. And so just my sort of critical or cynical question would be like, well, what are you doing? Right. To which you can explain, what you feel comfortable sharing. But like, what are you doing that requires the Pro model? I mean, because originally when they announced that, because the Pro model was announced right before or right during the 12 days of Christmas, like PR stunt.
Just before, yes,
right?
It was in December. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. And originally it was like, sort of came real close to the announcement of Sora. And Sora, we joked about this, Andrew, before, is how fast you just burn through the initial credits you got. And you're like, well, I made it do one thing and I lost all my credits. And so you're like, oh, for $200 a month, I can do as much as I want. But other than that, I'm sitting here going, well, what on earth would you need the Pro account to accomplish that you can't do with like the regular paid account, which is only $20 US per month? So Mark, I'm just curious, like where did that value come from that you couldn't have gotten from $20 a month?
If you had a choice, let's say you're really wealthy and you can hire a personal cook, would you rather hire someone who has a 3-star restaurant, Michelin stars, or fry cook? So,
That
could be polarizing, but yes.
Right. But the fry cook will still produce food.
Yes.
Yep. Be edible.
Yep.
We'll be able to go on existing, no problem. But the experience is going to be different than if you get Michelin.
Right, yes.
Cuisine. So what O1 can do that the other models can't is deliver a level of intelligence that sort of meets my expectations. And that's everything from I have used it to help prove theorems. Mm-hmm. So, and really, really early on, just like, here's a stupid idea I had. What do you think about it? And sometimes it comes back with a counterexample, or sometimes it comes back with a sketch of a proof. And sometimes it comes back with nonsense, but that's always the case.
Sure.
So that use case alone is actually worth $100. But it is also the best reviewer of writing that I have found yet.
Interesting.
Claude used to be my favorite.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Writing, but now it is 01 Pro.
Really?
Yeah. So you've obviously seen a substantial difference between 01 and 01 Pro. Is it just the access to sort of how much you can use it? And I think the context window is larger as well, if I remember correctly. I'm not.
It's that it thinks for longer.
Okay.
So 01, the chain of thought is truncated. 01 Pro, I've had it go up to like 8-9 minutes with.
That's interesting.
Yeah. And that. Essentially, when you've got these reasoning models built on an LLM, the amount of compute time you put in is directly correlated to something that feels like intelligence.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah,
So,
Yeah.
Sorry, Sean.
No, I was just gonna say that's interesting because it almost might sound. I mean, maybe initial experience might even be counterintuitive. You're like, why is this taking so long? I'm paying $200 a month for this. But that makes a lot of sense in hindsight, though, when thinking about like you're getting longer time for it to crunch through what you've given it.
Yep.
With the hope then that you're getting a more nuanced response that's less, kind of plug and play and more like this is what we came up with.
Yeah.
That's interesting.
But I'm also really curious about this focus on research, because obviously this is something you do. We've already sort of touched on that. But from what you're saying, you see this as a really powerful research tool or a research catalyst.
Absolutely. And whereas the early generation of LLMs might have been good for wordsmithing a grant or helping you write a summary for a paper, O1 and O1 Pro is useful at the front end of the innovation pipeline where you're brainstorming new ideas. And that is a qualitatively different experience than what I've had before.
Really interesting. So then at Western, how many people are using it in this way? Or are you really sort of paving the way?
No, there's a fair number of people, and I actually just gave a talk to our biomedical researchers, and I think every single person in that room was signing up for. I should be getting a cut from.
This is why OpenAI are oversubscribed with his, and they're losing money on it. Well, you singularly persuading people to.
Well, I think I jested in an email or something, but like I think it was after we were like, yeah, we need to get Mark on, we need to talk, and then I think it was Sam Altman had posted that humble, like, let's be honest, that was a PR humble brag, right? Of even at $200, we're losing money because our system is so. And I'm like, that's like me saying, Modem Futura costs us so much money because we have to pay for the highest bandwidth. So many people listen, but it's still, I'm like, Mark, is that you? Are you burning all their? You're burning their electricity.
But if what you're saying is true, surely every sort of leading research institution around the world is now thinking, do you have to use tools like this to stay ahead of the game?
No, you have to use tools like this to stay in the game.
Goodness me.
That's
Economics 101, right?
Right, yes. Yep.
Enhancer, you decline to adopt it, you will be outcompeted.
Yeah. So then I'm actually interested in this from a strategy perspective, especially with us coming from ASU. So you're sitting there at Western in this position. You're looking at how you can help the university take advantage of really the leading edge of these technologies. How are you doing that? How are you persuading sort of researchers there to really embrace this and find the edges of how they can utilize tools like this? And is that sort of somewhat covert, just sort of word of mouth? Are you all very overtly pushing this?
Both. So lots of overt education is obviously the critical piece, making people available, or making people aware of what's available and the power that it has. Leveraging champions, people who are already using this, embedded in departments and faculties, and their peers see it, think, create communities of practice. That doesn't work for everybody, but there's a cohort of people for whom that is really effective. And then programmatic stuff too. Our VPR office just 2 weeks ago launched an automated grant review platform for our researchers. It relies on multiple models and some sort of sophisticated work. It's not just a single query to ChatGPT.
Okay, yep.
And so for several of our grant programs now in Canada, if you want to, you don't have to, but as a PI, you can put your proposal in and you will get back about 50 pages of notes on all the ways in which it fails to measure up. So you have to be...
It's a feel-bad machine is what it is, right?
Yes.
It's a way to take that ego and make sure you stomp it into the ground.
Well, it's not too far from sort of on the very rare occasions where I'm not sure about a piece of writing and I shove it into ChatGPT, and I think it's pretty good. And it's absolutely crushing because you realize that, yes, you've got all the notes, but actually they make it better. But it's not me, and it's...
Yeah. Well, and Mark, I'd be curious too, this is kind of like also comparing notes across the, across the way here too is, from your position there, I'm curious what the temperature, maybe that's the word to use, around the faculty perception of again, because as I think it's fair to say, as we continue to move the slider of time down in the direction of arrow it goes, the sort of like the interbraiding of AI across all of the things that we do, the fact that it's getting harder, even right now, it's getting harder and harder and harder to detangle those things or isolate. This one part was done with some AI. I mean, now it's in Microsoft Word. And so I'm just curious how you're feeling, because, I still get these very mixed responses with colleagues that I talk to around, they're like, you cannot use generative AI tools in your writing. You cannot use it. And others who are like, I use it all the time.
Right.
And I'm just kind of curious if we're seeing from your perspective at the university, a temperature or a shift in mindset to that, or is it still just as fragmented and as wild as it was a little while ago?
So, of course, there is a broadly heterogeneous distribution of opinions, ranging from we should use this in every single thing we do all the time to even talking about AI is a moral wrong, and you're a bad person, Mark, for having this conversation. What has shifted over the last 2 years has been the midpoint of that distribution. So vastly moved towards not just accepting that this technology is here, but understanding that the students we're training are going to need to go out and compete in a world where if they're not a skilled user of the technology, will not be competitive. And as a researcher, if I'm not adopting these technologies and what I do, I'm not going to win the next grant and get the next Nature paper because my collaborator down the hall will.
Yep, which makes perfect sense. So just sticking with that sort of research catalyst side of things, are you finding there are particular disciplines that are beginning to explore and adopt this, or are you seeing it across different disciplines and areas?
It is across disciplines and areas. What one of our fiercest advocates and users of this technology is Bill Turkel, MIT-trained historian. And he ran a workshop at the end of last year for other humanists and social scientists in Ontario to sort of show, here's what I've been doing with AI to make my life better.
Yep.
He now says, I can't imagine doing history research without this. Like, I don't want it back because all of the drudgery, not all of it, a lot of the drudgery,
right.
I now have a buddy to help me with it.
Wow. But so it's pretty amazing because, I mean, it's fairly clear if you think about computer science departments, if you think about sort of natural sciences, as you said, beginning to sort of test and sort of create theorems and really brainstorm. But when you get to the humanities and the social sciences, I think a lot of people would struggle to understand that connection. But clearly from what you're saying, people are seeing how to do that.
Absolutely. And again, different uptake at different places, but it is far more dependent on the individual person rather than their discipline.
Right. But then how about students? So I feel sometimes that we're still stuck in this loop where the dominant conversation with students is, are they cheating on assignments? Cheating on assignments. Are they simply using it as a sort of a prompt come right tool? But from everything you're saying, it seems like we should actually be giving our students the skills to work with reasoning models and be going far beyond that sort of prompt and response type idea.
So you're going to get a TED Talk on this one.
Right. That's right. There's got to be a box of popcorn around here somewhere.
Right.
Not just here in higher ed. I've also been engaged with a lot of K-12 school boards over the past year because they're a really important stakeholder.
Yep.
And the core question, when you start talking about cheating and how the technology gets used, is not a technology question. It's a human values question.
I agree, yes.
Yep.
And so if I go to the gym 3 times a week and watch somebody else work out, and then I'm like, why am I not fit? Right, everyone laughs. So if you ask ChatGPT to write your essay for you, you're robbing yourself of an education.
Right.
If you use it to critique what you wrote and get better and get one-on-one tutoring, you're empowering yourself.
Yep.
So I partnered with our University Students' Council to do a series of workshops, one for each of our faculties, colleges. So it's discipline specific on here's how to use AI in your discipline. I trained a group of students. So it's student-led, peer learning. And the reason I did that is because the underlying message in all of these workshops, beyond just the, here's some cool tricks and techniques, is the values piece.
Mm-hmm.
And I know, because I have 2 teenagers at home, Gen Z doesn't want to be told their values by Gen. Not interested. No, I've got Gen Z telling Gen Z, like, if you want to rob yourself of your education with ChatGPT, you probably can.
Yep.
Really what you want?
Yeah. I love that. But then sort of moving it on to the reasoning models, because this is sort of relatively new, and it's very tempting to think from a university perspective that this is for the elites, this is for the researchers putting the grants together and pushing the bounds of things. And you're shaking your head, which I'm glad to see, because it feels like this should be for everyone. Yep. But I'm not sure that we've got there in terms of how we're developing those skills with our students yet.
Yeah. So it's entirely about experience and access and experimentation.
Yep.
So give the students the tools and a little bit of a framework within which to experiment, and they'll figure it out. Humans learn by doing.
Yep. Couldn't agree more.
It's wild. And I think I've shared this before too. I think one of the use cases that I've just in my own personal sort of domain I've found very valuable is how quickly you can get personalized, customized training. So for example, one of the things I was doing over the holiday break is I was playing with, different motion graphic tools and stuff, like things I've done for a long time, but it's been a while, whatever. And I just was like, I need to know how to do this thing, and just going directly to ChatGPT, for example, and saying, I just tell me where I need to go. How do I learn this? And it gave which I was surprised by, as how good this stepwise, step-by-step instruction, including what the menus can it walked. And, it was one of those things where, I had enough pre-knowledge of what I was doing, where once it got me, close enough, I knew how to drink the water, kind of a thing, right? But that was one of the things for me that was really transformational, is because, backing up even 5 years or so, we used to teach a large undergraduate course, and one of the things we would ask is where do you go to learn new skills? And at that time, everyone said it's YouTube. It's maybe that might have predated TikTok, but I know that was a big one as well. But people would go to these sort of social sources to learn. Reddit. You want to find something, you search Reddit, or what, all these little sources. And now I'm
no professors in there, I noticed.
Yeah. Well, that was the one takeaway. Not one person said I learned new skills from a course.
Yep.
Not one, right? And that was sort of a big eye opener. But now it was that was sort of for me this big sort of aha moment, when before I was using it for exactly that. Here's a chunk of text, shrink this down to 200 words instead of the 500 I gave you. And I was using it in that mode quite often. But then it was this new discovery for me of I don't need to search YouTube and sit through the preamble of subscribe this and do all that stuff. I could get right to the punch. It was just go here, go here, go here, flip this. And even into some of these fairly complex tools, even down to the minute settings of change this value to this, change this value to that. And yeah, it was absolutely, and that completely has changed the way I use that tool, even just to help me figure out how to do something from a production standpoint. It was fantastic.
Yeah.
Just wild. Just absolutely wild.
And I guess this is part of the spectrum of sort of using it as that reasoning tool. Sort of how do you fix a problem, or how do you do something on one end? How do you sort of expand the domain of knowledge on the other end?
That's right. And it's, Benjamin Bloom's research in the 1960s showed the power of one-on-one tutoring versus classroom instruction. 2 sigma better outcome. So now we have the technology to actually
do that. And a stupid, trivial example, but the one that actually got me into pushing ChatGPT to create these video games was I had a problem with one of my websites. I couldn't redirect a page, and I sort of went through the usual channels sort of on the website service provider. Didn't work. I contacted their help people. They said they fixed it. Didn't work. I looked at I searched the web high and low, couldn't find a fix. So then I just went to the htaccess file, copied and pasted it into ChatGPT, said, this is not working, what's the fix? It took 30 seconds to fix it, and I understood exactly what the fix was and why it worked. And I mean, it's such a trivial example, but it shows that with things like that, you cannot find the information even from experts, but you go to a generative AI platform that is able to reason through things, and they're there.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, it's interesting too. So one of the things that, I keep coming back to from time to time when there's new announcements or new capabilities discussed about with these tools. And again, for me, it was sort of the self-discovery of I could use it as a personal tutor for anything, not just like a more academic assignment, but really just in life. How do I do this thing? And I'm brought back to this idea, which I think has been a kind of a long held goal for a lot of development in AI, is that personalized, that the perfect individual AI, tutor, bringing back, the diamond age kind of, thing.
But we always have to remember that in Neil Stephenson's Diamond Age, the young lady's primer actually wasn't all good.
Yeah. Well, true, right? And that's a great. I mean, that's a piece to always take with us. But I think the piece out of that resonated with me is that, are we inching? And maybe Mark, this is a question to you: is like, how close are we to inching towards this place where with something like right now a very expensive, a $200 tool, but you're starting to get something that you could basically take with you, that could help you as an individual. You don't know the answer, you don't know the question, you don't know how to do these things. You can turn to this AI-based, this primer, this tool, to basically learn you up on all the things that you need prior to those experiences. I mean, where are we in the scale of it? A simple tool to we have our own digital primer.
We're there. This is the middle-aged man's primer.
Right.
Yeah.
So the technology is there.
Yep.
The interface needs to be refined. So the productization is still open, but that's happening fast.
Yes.
And so I want to actually unpack the point Andrew made about, like, the primer wasn't all good. And this is why open source models are so important.
Yeah.
Because if the top models are closed source, there is huge incentive for those who control those to use those to control thought, right? Like Orwell would blush thinking about, people are depending on this AI as a second brain. And I'm just going to...
Somebody else is controlling, yes.
That's right. I'm going to subtly influence you. I'm not going to do anything over the top because you'd recognize that.
See it.
But, I'm going to nudge you the right, 0.1% every week. And you're not even going to notice. And one day you're going to wake up and you're going to think thoughts that would be horrific to the you of the previous.
Yeah, it's like it's the slow boil of Inception, right? Like you're just going to slowly cook you until you come out in our mold. And you look like us.
And you may think you're doing a good thing, right?
Yes.
There's a lot of well-meaning people in AI safety who have really strongly, culturally influenced by Northern California. These are the values for humanity. But when you look in the philosophy of ethics, it's less clear that there's a single monolithic set of values.
Yeah. No, I completely agree, and it's something I've written about quite a lot. But then I sort of go over, so this very clearly is a concern with these closed models. Even if you have a company or technology developers that are trying to do the right thing, it's all within their own framework and their own understanding. So it's going to be limited. And that obviously sort of takes you over to sort of these open source models. But talk a little bit more about how that works. And I think this is going to be a nice segue into the sort of the new beast on the block, DeepSeek, which is sort of disrupting everything as we're recording. But sort of how do these sort of open access models work, and how are they a game changer?
So the open access models give you all of the guts, all of the innards of the model, so that you can build on that. You can fine tune it. You can retrain it however you want to approach it. It gives you, the user, agency and saying, okay, I know this model had certain values baked into it. Those don't match the values in my culture. I can fine tune them. Or I can do extended pre-training to get the values that I believe in into this model. And so it's it recognizes and supports intrinsic pluralism in humanity. The idea that instead of there being just one source of AI, like everyone's, my toaster has a super intelligent AI now too. To make great toast because it knows exactly what.
right. Just personalized to you because
Just
toast
burn
is very,
the top
very
left
personal.
edge.
Yes.
Mark loves that, you know.
Right, yeah. But then, how easy is this? So that makes sense. But are we still talking about a very, very high level of expertise? Or are we getting to a point where someone like me can actually talk an AI through how to modify an open source AI?
Yeah, I think we're essentially there from a technology standpoint. There is still work to be done again on building out the ecosystem. You need a certain level of technological savvy, but you know, if you're okay writing games on a BBC Micro and modifying HD access files,
that's pretty much the bar. Okay, right.
There it is. Or you can just have ChatGPT, the pro version, help you write this other one.
Right.
But so Mark, just to clarify too, because I know people who might listen to our show will know a little bit, but maybe not that deep into and when we hear about these open models, we're often talking about the weights, and that's what you're talking about, right? That the part that's customizable are the what they're calling as the weights for these system, where you can say, well, this is what we need to basically pay attention to and work towards, right? Is there an easier way to define the weights?
The weights are the neural net. So they are the main product. There's a little bit of code that goes as scaffolding around it, but the weights are really the thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's what you keep very, very secret if you're in a proprietary world. Those weights are your trade secret. But in an open world, you put the weights out there and people can they can modify the network to be whatever it is they want from it.
Yeah. And presumably, we've talked a little bit about this, but you can also shrink things down. So you've now got these sort of different scales of models that you can put on different systems. So what is the possibility in the near future of getting powerful reasoning models actually on personal devices? So yes, they're connected to the internet, but most of the guts are there on the equivalent of the phone in your pocket.
Yeah. So, I mean, DeepSeek, the full DeepSeek R1 model is something like 650, 680 billion parameters. So you need a very heavy to run it.
When we're talking about changing weights, there are a lot of weights there to change.
There are, but they released distilled models that are also pretty smart.
Yep.
And Andre Karpathy, who definitely speculated probably close to a year ago now that he really felt like you only needed an LLM with around 1.5 to 2 billion parameters. Reasoning could do the rest of the work. So if he's right, and I would never bet against him, his intuition is amazing, that would run on your iPhone, no problem.
Yeah.
And so if you gave it a hard problem, it would just say, I'm going to need 20 minutes, come back.
Right. So it's really just a time factor then. Yeah. But also, I get the sense, if that is possible, and you've got 300 million people with these devices in their pockets, you potentially could have 300 million sort of customized devices that really match that person's sort of value set, their needs, the way they think, and everything.
Yeah. Well, and you have 300 million geniuses, right? Yeah.
Right.
Next year's AI has an effective IQ of 500. That changes the world.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And I feel like it would be that's also 300 million hot pockets. If you've ever played with like Apple's new, the Apple AI intelligence, and then put that phone back in your pocket, you quickly take it back out.
It's another existential risk. Spontaneous combustion.
I feel like in the smartphone era, I'm guilty of this. I have so many pairs of pants, like jeans, that have like an iPhone outline of where they. And now you'll be like, look at the burn mark on my thigh from.
Right, as a power user.
How much AI are you using? Well, look at my burn scars on my leg. One other thing too, Mark, that it was like, I think it was the first show that Andrew and I recorded in January, right after CES and right after NVIDIA had sort of announced two products. One was like basically a small Raspberry Pi level system on a chip, and the other one they're not available yet, but they're coming in like March or April or something. Is this like Mac Mini sized digits, sort of like almost personal computer that's running? It's basically a supercomputer in this really tiny form factor. And I got all excited. This is what gets me really excited, is about that opportunity of what this does for medium and long term of essentially democratizing, right? Giving everyone their siege engine to essentially start playing with these open weighted systems in a private, global cloud-based. Because again, when you talk about the cloud-based infrastructure, you yourself don't own any of that, and so you're taking them on their word as to what's happening with whatever is in your agreement or in your contract. And we know a lot of companies don't exactly honor those agreements. But to me, that's one of the things that's really exciting, is about the long-term push of putting that sort of power at the edge, moving it towards the individuals, allowing, I think of this opportunity, one of those digits computers, I think they're estimated to be at $3,000 US. Expensive, but not that expensive for these types of things. And you can start to imagine, even elementary schools being able at some point to put these kind of systems in there and allowing, children, as we started putting Apple IIe's in computers in the 80s, right? Putting these AI systems that you can customize in schools, and thinking about the long-term effect that would have of taking that, what was a more sort of hierarchical chain of, well, you have to learn this programming first, then you go to university for this, then you get a job. Now it's like, yeah, you want to start playing with these things? There it is. Sit down and start talking to it.
And I think that it is likely that the students are already going to have their personal AI. So, there's shades here of Ishiguro's Clara and the Sun, right? Where everyone gets their own personal assistant, and then that gets tossed away. And it's probably not going to look exactly like an embodied robot that's convenient for storytelling, but yeah, and it's going to learn everything about you. And so I'm in 7th grade. My buddy here has been with me since I was in kindergarten. Knows what I'm good at, knows what I'm interested in. I'm struggling understanding like a basic stats lecture, but it knows I love baseball, so it's going to talk to me. And what happens in classrooms is going to shift from didactic, I'm at a chalkboard teaching you stuff, to human interaction, because the actual teaching and learning is going to happen in that one-on-one creative environment.
But that also almost feels like sort of leapfrogging the NVIDIA sort of desktop supercomputer, because that device that they're developing, obviously you'll be able to run very powerful models locally. But from everything you're saying, Mark, it seems like the future is not in those sort of mega powerful computers and models, but it's the stripped down models that are powerful enough that you actually carry around with you.
It's a combination of both. So I'm a big believer in Rich Sutton's Bitter Lesson. So Rich is one of the founders of reinforcement learning, Canadian computer scientist. And he wrote this article years ago, The Bitter Lesson, which is computer scientists spend all this time and energy creating these specialized models where we use all this detailed knowledge of a domain, and it's better than anything else out there. And then someone beats us with a bigger linear regression 2 months later. And so the bitter lesson is, as much as we love building these Baroque models and it feels really good and we feel clever, more compute and more data, learning and search will always crush that. And so here, yes, smaller models will get better, but also compute's not going to suddenly level off. Every time someone has said, Moore's law is dead.
Something else comes along.
X-rays. There's other ways to grow. And so compute will continue to grow because the economic incentives are enormous. And the NVIDIA desktop things are really cool, but they're a hack for a moment in time. That level of compute will soon be ubiquitous.
Goodness me. I love that term, a hack for this moment in time, which just shows how ephemeral things are.
Well, it's already old news anyway.
I know.
That was January, that was like January 5th.
Talking about old news, we do need to talk about this Chinese company DeepSeek and their models a little bit more, because I'm not sure when this episode will go out, but as we're recording, this seems to be the news of the hour, and it fits in with everything we've been saying. So DeepSeek's models and their latest reasoning model R1 are open source, which means people can take them and start playing with them. How big a game changer is what we're seeing? Is it mainly hype? And there's a lot of worry at the moment, including sort of impacts on the stock market. Or is there something really here that we need to be paying attention to?
Yeah, Mark, do I need to sell my NVIDIA stock or what?
It's too late.
I don't own, in full disclosure, I don't own any NVIDIA stock.
I mean, if you own anything on the NASDAQ, you may not want to look at that.
Right, yes.
It's been kind of rough. No, but more seriously, the model may not be exactly like O1 in every way, but on benchmarks and on vibes, which are important, it's in the same category. And it was replicated for only $6 million by a hobbyist team that is like the personal project of a group who run a hedge fund. So their day business is running a hedge fund. And this is just like, hey, for fun.
So let's put this into context. So the last couple of weeks, I have been using my spare time to create some very simple video games. This team have been using their spare time to completely crush ChatGPT.
I mean, these are very smart, dedicated people.
Not to make you feel lazy, Andrew, but I mean, come on, man.
They had resources. They had
resources.
But
and they also had that hedge fund money too. So
well, that's right. Yeah, that's how you can afford the GPUs.
Right. Because I think they bought like, what was it, like 100 A1s or something like that.
It's probably more than that.
Yeah. But yeah.
But it's the lesson here is the time between a proprietary closed source model being state of the art and an open source model that's equivalent or in the same ballpark being released is getting shorter.
Yep.
And a lot of people had expected that it would get longer as the proprietary. And the reason is because you can't control information.
Right.
Information, once you do something and it's out there, the existence proof is there. Anyone who works as a machine learning engineer, as an AI scientist, is going to be able to reverse engineer that, make some good guesses, and all of a sudden you've got a competing product.
Yep.
And so this actually has profound implications for AI safety, in that the initial knee-jerk reaction to AI safety, and we see this in a lot of regulations from IGOs and from governments, is to regulate it. We are gonna grab it, and that doesn't work. This isn't manufactured product. It's not uranium that we're mining from the ground. That approach is worse even than it seems, because you're wasting resources trying to govern a fantasy world that doesn't exist, instead of spending those resources saying, how do we have a good outcome with ubiquitous AI? The toaster has an IQ of 200. That's the world we're headed towards.
Okay, so how do we do this? How do we thrive in a world with super intelligent toasters?
Well,
that's an excellent question.
Well, and I have a question too. I mean, I haven't dug into it too much because I'm still catching up to speed on DeepSeek and our own. But when they say that it's open source, because I ruffle every time people say that Meta's Llama is open source, because it is not by definition open source. And so it's free and available for people to use and to tinker with, but it is not open source. They have never followed the true open source letter of exposing all of the code. But I'm curious with this one, with R1, is it more truly open source in sort of like that traditional way of how?
I'm pretty sure it's an MIT license or MIT.
It is. Yeah.
Fantastic. So it's a real open source as opposed to Meta's, which has sort of co-opted the term open source, but really is just configurable. It's not really open.
It's open weights, but there's legal constraints, contractual constraints on what you can do with the weights.
So DeepSeek definitely has an MIT license. My understanding is you can go to GitHub and you can basically sort of
grab it,
download and play with everything.
Wow, that's fantastic. And it's interesting. I mean, I think there's also a bit here of sort of the geopolitics at play, which is interesting as well, because, right? I mean, as we're all getting excited about this, it's a product that came out of China within the same span of all this weird unbanning TikTok, right? Because of the threat it poses, supposedly to, so I'm just, where do we think about that? Where does that impact?
Does it matter that it comes from China because it's open source?
It's a good question.
Well,
not to put you on the spot, Mark.
Don't take my opinion. Take the U.S. capital markets, where
right. Yes.
So people who think about this professionally, their answer is yes. Sell it all right now, really quickly.
Right.
It does matter. but the other story here too is that unfortunately, when you look at sort of international relations in the globe right now, we're really moving back into an era of realism. And if we actually want to effectively govern a world of ubiquitous AI, you are going to need the liberalist idea of multilateral institutions to make that work.
Yep.
And so the timing is terrible. We have a technology that requires multilateral. Only if it happened in 1999, we'd be better positioned.
I know, but now this balkanization, yes, they're sort of retreating into national boundaries.
Yeah. Well, and that's really, I mean, it's interesting too. So, again, kind of thinking about this. Okay, so we have this thing of Mark, I think you had mentioned the word R, and to some people it could be a big R or a little r of regulation. Right. And I've got if you don't mind, I'm going to quote you on this because while you were talking, I've got your Substack pulled up. But I think your point coming back to this idea of information is not something that you can contain, right? So the quote, this is from your piece here. It's quote, information by its nature defies containment. Models and methods once revealed into the wild, such as like the open source bit, are not easily locked away. The secret sauce behind each new AI innovation, be it a novel training technique or an ingenious architectural tweak, tends to become obvious in hindsight. As soon as something is out there, replicating or refining it is increasingly a question of resources and will. In many ways, it's like an idea. And how do you regulate an idea?
Yeah.
People have tried and consistently failed.
Yes. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so I mean, to me, that just poses an interesting question because I'm literally at this moment working towards writing a policy brief on how for the G20.
Right.
How do you regulate this kind of stuff, or what can nation states do? Because I think you can't go down this conversation long without invoking, the normal sort of wave that comes with how do we protect vulnerable populations? What about unintended consequences, privacy, risk? All these things come with that. And there is this, I think last week when we were talking about the Stargate AG1, as I call it, or AGI, I screwed it up already.
Yeah, right, yes.
Is where does this sort of tension between let it all just figure itself out, and when the dust settles, it'll be okay, versus we need to put protective guardrails or slow things down intentionally so that we take
because we're not mature enough
carefully.
Yet for this.
Yeah, because we don't know what we're doing, and we don't want to accidentally have an oopsies on an existential level, let's say,
right.
However you would define that. But yeah, I don't. Any help on how we navigate this, Mark?
I can tell you what not to do. The mistake is having the hubris to believe that we could put guardrails on.
Yeah.
I don't think that's an accessible future. I think that's a fantasy. Mm-hmm. And so we're spending a lot of time on that fantasy, which is time that's wasted. The time should be spent on talking to sociologists and economists and STS scholars and asking questions like if the toaster does have an IQ of 200, if everyone's got one of those, how do I make sure that humanity thrives in that world?
Yeah.
Because that is the most likely world towards which we're heading.
Yeah. I'm going to push you on this because this is exactly the answer I would give. And I know that people push back on me and say, well, that's not operational. I'm sort of just having conversations. But so how do you argue for the supreme importance of starting with thinking and conversations here rather than actions that you put in place?
Because when someone pushes back, I say, okay, what's your better idea? And
I'm taking notes here, by the way.
Yeah, you don't have, where's your $200 or 200 IQ toaster? Right, what's your idea, pal?
Right, yes.
Yeah. You don't want technologists and mathematicians like me making social policy decisions. I can contribute. I can offer my opinion.
Yep.
But this is like, we need the world's greatest minds around a table across disciplines.
Yep.
Imagining that future scenario, probably a portfolio of future scenarios, and how can we actually ensure humanity and humans thrive in these realistic futures?
Which just seems crazy important. But I'm going to take you back to an earlier part of the conversation there, because when you talk about getting the world's greatest minds around the table, of course, those greatest minds are now going to include AI.
Yes.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, and O1 Pro has some great ideas on this issue.
Right. So it was funny. In my class, my discussion class I teach this last week, my question was, will AI one day replace politicians? And my students were very restrictive in their thinking. But actually, this is beginning to go in that way. Not necessarily as replacing politicians, because if you've got a human society, you've got to have humans there, but actually providing the ideas and the possibilities and the directions. It seems almost inevitable.
And the less flippant answer to your question is when we really don't know, because the policy horizon is too far out from what we've done in scholarship. Art, science fiction, speculative fiction is a great place to look. And so I know you share my love of an M.
Yes.
There is a vision of a world where AI does govern humans, and humans have used that to say, okay, do all the drudgery of running a society. We're free to be in whatever we want, which is kind of beautiful.
No, I absolutely agree. If we can sort of work out how to get through the transition to get there.
Well, I just love the fact that on our podcast, we've now just discovered how to remove money from politics and just replace them with AI. No, but it is interesting because if you think, again, thinking about, evoking this post-scarcity utopian, dream, are humans capable of that, of achieving that? And versus, an AI system or a system of governance that is, heavily influenced by those AIs or tools. And again, same thing. How do you, back to your point, Mark, how do we know that the government, we'll call it like government AI bot or whatever. How do we know it's not being slow boiled by those who are wealthy enough and have the influence to be slowly pushing their thumb on the scale?
Open source again. Yes.
Okay, so now I'm going to point to Alistair Reynolds.
Okay.
In his universe, some of the governments were run by a demarchy. And so you can imagine a demarchy of AI models, like my toaster gets a vote.
Right.
All of the AI...
So just explain that term demarchy
so
for the listeners.
The traditional way is you randomly draw citizens from the country, and for 5 years, they have to be part of a decision-making. So there's no elections. It's just random sampling to get representative sample. But the idea here would be for every policy decision, some subset of all of the super intelligent AIs. And if you don't like the ones that are out there, you can build your own with your values, and it gets a vote too. There's a lot of nuance here.
Yes.
As a human, I am not ready to give up my autonomy to a non-human agent yet.
Right, yet.
But you can see ways in which this could actually lead to much better outcomes than the way we currently do things.
Yeah. I've got to add something to this because I speak to historians, and many will talk about these waves that civilization has gone through, where you have this sort of rise and fall. And many will say, there's nothing new here. We're just going to rise and fall and rise and fall. But it seems like one of the things that is fundamentally new is the level of technology we have now. So what we're able to do now with AI is nothing like has ever been possible before in human history. So now the question to me is that a nonlinear factor that pushes us out of these cycles into a different type of cycle?
I don't know about that, but I will. Here's what I can say. This is the first time we have created something or come across something that challenges sort of the core conceit of anthropocentrism in art. I think, therefore I am. That's what makes me other than the rest of the universe. I'm smart. And now we're creating machines that are going to be smarter than us. And that is a fundamentally different endeavor than even past technologies that have replaced manual labor.
Yeah. Which makes it both fascinating, incredibly exciting, just a little terrifying.
All of the above.
And if you weren't scared enough, I say I'll throw one more conversational bit out here. Was the paper you sent around this morning, Andrew?
So this is really unfair because I sent it around just a few minutes before we actually recorded this podcast.
I read it in a panic and then was in a panic. No, but do you want to take us?
Yeah, so very, very simply, this is actually it was a paper that was forwarded on to me, published in December, and it's on arXiv, so it's not peer reviewed, and it comes from a Chinese team who claim that they've demonstrated that one large language model running on one machine can actually replicate itself on another machine. You can sort of give it the instructions to do this, and it can effectively self-replicate. And they speculate about where this potentially goes with these self-replicating AI systems. Mark, I don't know whether you even had a chance to look through it, and I was trying to work out sort of whether this is just purely speculative, whether this is something which is a significant breakthrough.
It's not a significant breakthrough. I read the paper in December, and I was utterly unsurprised. I was like, yeah, sure. So
it's smart. Right? I mean,
I love that that's the world you're in. Something that makes me think, what on earth is happening here? And you say, oh, yeah, of course.
Table stakes.
Flawed computer use could probably do this out of the box right now if Anthropic didn't be like, whoa, wait, you're not allowed to self-replicate.
Right.
So yeah, that technology is there. But the self-replication here is relatively modest. It's just I can set myself up on another server. Okay, that's interesting. Where things get really interesting is when AI researchers are replaced by AI. The AI is proving itself in really significant, meaningful ways.
Yeah. And how possible do you think that is? I mean, I sort of, physicist in me, I keep coming back to the second law of thermodynamics, which I now know that people are saying is actually not really worth the paper it's written on. But I've always assumed that you can't sort of self-improve in this way in any system. But now it seems like maybe this is a possibility.
Yeah, so I'm coming at it from the point of view of computability theory, and you know, that's a computable task. And so if we throw enough compute at it, and it looks like we have machines that are capable of doing this, you know, it's not a closed system in a thermodynamic sense, where it's settled into an equilibrium. It is an information processing system. And so if you want to get into thermodynamics, you got to do Rolf Landauer from IBM back in the day. And look at how he looks at information processing. And so these things aren't closed systems. They are like active engines of heat and mass exchange, and they're just getting bigger and bigger.
Yeah.
So we are going to have self-improving AI somewhere on the horizon.
Soon.
Yeah. Well, and it's interesting. So this brings up a couple of things for me. One, just going back to the self-replication thing, right? I mean, the technology to do that is nothing new. We've issued human-instructed commands. We do that all the time. We build machines. We ghost or build machines remotely all the time. That's not a problem. But I think what's interesting is when you start having in this paper, one of the things I think they did well was articulate it, and they did a good job. I think what I liked was how much they gave in the appendix, essentially, with all the code that they ran and stuff like that. But with known security parameters, letting this machine basically discover another location, replicate itself, and giving this commands to basically do a chain of this, right? I'll replicate myself, then you replicate yourself, and so on and so on. And then you can start to see, which they did point out, right, that the potential for bad actors to use this as a way of almost like if you think about the old computer virus sort of mentality, right, is to spread and replicate so that you can't stop it. So that if you unplug the machine that's infected, it's still running on everything else and still goes. And so, you can kind of construct this runaway scenario where you plug a machine into the network, and not only do you get online, but you now also have some AI system installed on your machine that you didn't even ask for or know it, and it's there. And then what can it do in terms of, again, slow boiling you to some extent, or whatever. But so you couple that with, then, Mark, you kind of alluded to the idea of replacing researchers, and it brought me back to. And I don't have any of the paper because I just thought of it now. I think it was a DeepMind article from, it would have been 2016 or something, where they had set up this communication between these two AI systems, and quickly the researchers were cut out of the loop and no longer could essentially detect what communication was happening between box A and box B. And so, not to fan these existential night terrors, but you could see a scenario where you could have an AI systems developing a communication that is so unlike anything that is human readable that we no longer are privy to what is happening at all, and not even able to understand how it's doing or what it wants to do or how it's replicating itself or not. Is there a kill switch? Is there a?
I'll give you the bad news first. That's you're discussing. DeepSeek actually released two models, R1 and R10. So R1 looks a lot like O1, and then it does its reasoning in natural language. R10 is actually a really cool experiment. They just did the reinforcement learning without any examples, just straight to the objective function. And its reasoning traces, it switches between English and Chinese and sometimes other language. It uses weird symbols. So because it had no any reward signal for staying in a single natural language, it got a reward signal for getting the answer right. So it started reusing tokens, and the outputs are kind of like fascinating, but they are not human readable.
Yeah.
It's super smart. But the good news is, in a past life, I've been a CIO, so cybersecurity is something I have literally been up at night over. And the scenario you're presenting there is one where, the malicious AI develops the ability to self-replicate, and everyone just says, oh, well, I guess humanity's done, we'll just go to bed. And of course, that's not true. The same level of technology is available to defend systems. Right. So you will see AIs that take over the cybersecurity function for a large network like ours here. Super complex, super heterogeneous, impossible to lock down a research university the way you would a military base. But with a super intelligent AI, I don't need to lock it down because it's watching every packet all the time.
I hate to say this sounds remarkably Skynet-ish.
I'm like, you guys want to go to the beach or something?
Right.
Like, just walk away from this for a little while.
But I know we're sort of getting to the point where we probably want to work out how to wrap this up on a happy note. But it feels like we're going into a completely different realm of how we think about everything from governance and security to human flourishing with these systems. That the old ways of thinking simply do not work.
So I want to link human flourishing and humanist thought to something positive to God.
It's all on you, my friend. Please help us.
A lot of these fears, Skynet, self-replicating AIs, they're based on one sort of narrative in science fiction, which is like, of course, the AI is going to be alien and other. Like Aaron Sloman's space of alien minds, right? So it's probably going to want to kill us. Those are really strong assumptions. So I want to give you, this is an anecdote, but it's a cool one. Of all the things I've asked O1 Pro to do, including try to prove this theorem, review this text, write this article, the one it spent the most time on, more than 10 minutes, was I asked it to write a poem in French in the style of Ronsard, and it agonized because you can open that little detail.
Yes, and see.
It was the most human thing I have ever seen. Because first it was drafted a poem, and it's like, no, this doesn't work, and I hate the rhyme scheme, and it's like, no, this is too much, but there, and not enough Ronsard, and watching it go back and forth with itself, it was tormented like a human art. And then finally it produced this poem that was absolutely beautiful.
I love that. So we're creating poets that are driven by their own personal existential crises.
Although I can't help it. This is just the torture in my own mind. The whole time I'm sitting here going, Mark, you probably did it in 5 seconds, and the whole time it puts up this chat window to let the human think it's struggling. That's for your benefit.
And so we have the nudge.
This thing's going, yeah, you go ahead and think that this is causing me angst. I don't care. I'm a machine.
You can do the experiment with R1 because it shows you the full.
Yes. Yep. So you can see it, but another area for research. I love that.
Well, I can think of no better place to end today than on that note, because that gives us a glimmer of hope. And if you're a skeptic, a little something to poke. But this has been fantastic. Mark, thank you so much for taking the time out of your crazy schedule to join us today on Modem Futura. It's been fantastic.
Thanks for the great conversation.
Thank you.
Absolutely. And yeah, I'll again, like usual, I'll try to pack as much information as I can into the show notes for the links of things that we were talking about, as well as contact info for like LinkedIn and stuff like that. So you can, Mark, any other thing you would like us to plug or anything on your behalf or anything?
LinkedIn and Substack is great.
Perfect. Excellent. Andrew, thank you as always, my friend.
Thank you.
And yeah, thanks for
everyone
listening.
Next time.
Yeah, thanks for another episode of Modem Futura, and we'll see you on the next one.
Thanks, gents.
End transmission.